owner of, so this is the context. You're the owner of a small manufacturing concern. You employ Jane to do a particular piece of work. Let's say she's the janitor. I mean, just make it very simple. She's the janitor. You employ Jane as a janitor. And it's quite clear what she needs to do. It's a very restricted area that she's got to keep clean and swept. You agree on the price before, you agree on a wage. Month one, she does exactly what you required her to do, and you pay her the wage at the end of month one. Day one, month two, Jane comes to work. She sits in the corner staring at the broom and does nothing. And you go to her and you say, Jane, sweep the floor. And she says to you, why should I? What would you say?
Thank you for the easy example.
So, by the way, folks, this is not just picking on Les. Anybody's welcome to answer. Just reasonably, if you were in Les's shoes, and this is the scenario. You've agreed a price for the task. The person's done the job. You've paid them what they've iteration one, month one, beginning month two. She sits, does nothing. You say, sweet. She says, why should I?
Well, isn't that exactly why you're here? You were hired as the janitor. We had a nice, clear discussion on what your roles and responsibilities were. You did them very nicely for the first month. What has changed?
So, can you see then that basically what you're referring to in this relationship is that you're saying, listen, we made a deal. Right? I mean, there was I agreed to pay you X and you agreed to do Y. What has changed? I mean, in other words, what gives you the right to expect her to do what's required of her in terms of what you're requiring her to do is that you're paying her to do that. And that basically means to say that we're assuming that as a boss, what gives you the right to tell her to do something?
The fact that you have a contract of employment.
That's right.
And that contract of employment specifies the relationship, the responsibilities, the remuneration, and all those other good things.
No, that's exactly it, Liz. I mean, and I think that is how we generally view the relationship between boss and subordinate. It's a contracted relationship, But now let's just consider the implications to this. If we view the relationship between boss and subordinate as a contract, let's say, well, how did this relationship start? Well, at some point you went into the market, with your money. She came into the market with her ability to work. You met each other. We're dealing with a contract here. So obviously there was, before you actually go off and have the contract, what are you going to do?
We should negotiate.
You negotiate. And in any negotiation, what are both parties trying to do?
Obtain the maximum benefit.
Now, if all of these people in this enterprise were to be there to attain maximum benefit, to get as much as they can for giving as little as possible, what's your prognosis, doctor? I mean, surely it can't be good. So the point I'm trying to make is that our fundamental assumption about the relationship between boss and subordinate at work is that it's a trade. But the problem with viewing it as a trade is that we entrench a fundamental hostility in the interests of boss and subordinate. They are constantly haggling. If all of these people were to be there to get as much as they could for getting as little as possible, then eventually we don't have a surplus, and then finally we'll kind of consume the cake. Surely, when you ask somebody to do something, you're exercising power over them. Not so, you're asking them to do something.
Yeah. Correct.
And we said, well, who's the person who's got genuine power? The boss you're going to work for because you want to, or the boss you're going to work for because you have to? And we said it's the boss you're going to work for because you want to. And I asked you to describe this person. And you'll agree with me that this is quite a list, this. I mean, there's a hell of a lot of stuff in that list. Where's the pay? Isn't that surprising? The pay.
Oh, yes.
Isn't that interesting, Les?
Yeah.
The one thing that we think is the foundation to the relationship between the boss and subordinate, you intuitively don't even raise when you consider the boss who you will go the extra mile for and do stuff for. It's assumed. In fact, both of these people will pay you. In fact, this person, I mean, this is bizarre. This person on the left might conceivably even pay you more. The difference between them is not pay. So in other words, we need to recalibrate our understanding of the essence of the relationship between boss and subordinate. You know, this is not just a trade. You can't afford to see it as a trade. You've got to see that there's more going on in your relationship with your subordinate. It actually is a relationship of power. And basically what makes a relationship of power acceptable is a hell of a lot more than the money you pay. So that's then our first axiom. The first axiom says, what is at issue between employer and employee is not the price of a commodity called labor. It is the legitimacy of a relationship of power. So you've got to, so in order to crack the code of getting the leadership thing right, there's a number of things you've got to revisit. The first thing you've got to revisit is your assumption of the nature of the relationship between boss and subordinate. But there's some other things you've also got to crack, and that's how you envisage organization, what you think about organization, you see? Because, so the narrative that we have at organization really hasn't changed for the last 4 or 5 decades. I mean, we still see organizations as systems, as kind of like machines that go through processes to produce outputs. That's what organizations do. That's how most people think of organization. We have recognized from the sort of the early 60s onwards that there's a problem with the relationship between bosses and subordinates, which is why there's been a growing kind of discipline of leadership science over the last 4 decades. Because people kind of have this understanding that we've got to move away from command and control approaches. So there's been this understanding. But we've tried to recalibrate how we understand the relationship between boss and subordinate. We've not recalibrated our fundamental assumptions of that relationship, and we've also not recalibrated our understanding of organization. Organizations are systems that work and require to be managed. Managers are in charge of organizations. What are leaders in charge of? Folks, surely a leader is in charge of a community. So you can't just change cosmetically how you understand the relationship between boss and subordinate by trying to get more leadership thinking into how you look at hierarchy without also changing how you view the relationship between boss and subordinate and how you think of the organization. Organizations aren't machines that produce work. Organizations are communities of people who either collaborate to serve and succeed or actually end up failing because they've got too much internal contradiction. There's too much hostility between the parties involved. And what you have to understand, when you view the relationship between boss and subordinate as a trade, you will entrench that hostility. So that's our first port of call. If you want to crack this leadership thing, don't think of your business as a machine. Think of your organization as a community. You know, leaders are in charge of communities, managers are in charge of systems. And when you think of your organization as a community, you don't employ the person as a resource, like an energy that you pour into the organization. It's a living relationship with somebody. And you can have a living relationship of power, by the way. That person will be willing to be subordinate to you, but you've got to do a hell of a lot more than pay them by your own admission. You've got to do all of this stuff here. And I mean, this doesn't even include pay, this.